Lord Acton wrote that true wisdom in philosophy considers the origin and the germ of an event. To understand the depth of history, you must look for where things begin. Look at the current tensions surrounding the Strait of Hormuz. We see massive oil tankers navigating a precarious waterway, carrying roughly 1/4 of the world's seaborne oil. Analyzing this modern choke point through contemporary reporting misses the underlying architecture of global trade. We focus on immediate political rhetoric and lose sight of how these security systems were established. Understanding the modern frameworks governing global security requires us to excavate their historical and institutional roots. We have to follow Lord Acton's advice and find the germ. The early 19th century Barbary Wars and the origin of the U.S. Navy provide a structural template for understanding the international security order. This diagram compares the Mediterranean Sea in 1801 with the Persian Gulf today. Both bodies of water are defined by narrow geographic corridors. These corridors concentrate immense wealth into tight spaces, turning them into stress tests for the limits of state power. The international security order is a continuous, historical recalculation of leverage and power. Dissecting the geopolitical reality of the Barbary Coast reveals the mechanics behind a modern blockade at Hormuz. Before 1800, the Atlantic world operated on a strict mercantilist economy. Trade was a zero-sum game. One nation's gain was another's loss. The British and French navies dominated as major powers enforcing this system. The United States and the Barbary states were players on the periphery. Following its independence, the United States lacked any effective naval forces. The new nation relied on the philosophical ideal of freedom of the seas, without possessing the military backing to enforce it. Facing limited access to European markets, American merchants turned to the Mediterranean, putting them in the path of the Barbary states, Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli. These North African entities were positioned perfectly along major trade routes. Without an overarching security order to deter them, they applied maximum leverage against vulnerable merchant shipping. Philosophical beliefs in free trade hold no weight on the global stage if a state cannot project the physical force required to secure them. The Barbary states operated a system of state-backed privateering, historically known as corsairing. This flowchart maps the economic extortion model. The system worked by demanding heavy monetary tributes from foreign governments in exchange for safe passage through international waters. The Barbary states operated a highly institutionalized toll system. These sovereign entities used state-backed privateers to enforce their demands on international shipping. The United States initially debated its response. By 1797, nearly a fifth of the entire federal budget was paid out in tribute. Washington had to weigh the immediate cost against the long-term strategic drain of continuous extortion. American leaders discovered that paying for passage simply incentivized further, more outrageous demands. Appeasing a threat within a zero-sum geopolitical system is structurally unsustainable. In 1801, President Thomas Jefferson rejected Tripoli's demand for increased payments. Tripoli responded by declaring war. That refusal to pay tributes necessitated the authorization, funding, and deployment of a standing U.S. Navy and Marine Corps. The United States moved into active kinetic power projection, enforcing strategic blockades and engaging in direct naval combat. After years of sporadic combat, hostilities concluded with a negotiated settlement, one enforced by American military capability rather than trust. The existence of the United States Navy proves that access to global trade has historically been secured through military leverage, not diplomatic entitlement. Looking at the modern era, we frequently talk about the post-war international order, an order that defined the landscape after 1945. Many assume this modern order is held together primarily by shared values, by multilateral cooperation and diplomatic norms. Historically, the stability of this system has relied on concrete distributions of U.S. military power. These historical tactics mirror current events. In the spring of 2026, the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz and the introduction of a 20% cargo toll reflect the same structural mechanics used 2 centuries ago. Both of these systems exploit geographic choke points. They apply pressure in narrow corridors to test the limits and the resolve of the dominant security power. Modern maritime extortion in Hormuz is a repetition of historical, structural pressures testing the current distribution of power. Look at the current anxiety surrounding shifting defense spending and political pressure placed on NATO allies. Modern analyses frequently interprets these alliance shifts as a chaotic breakdown of the rules-based order. The current tension reflects a structural shift in how security is financed. During the 19th century, nations either paid for passage or built the navies to secure it. Today, the U.S. is pressuring allies to assume a greater share of the costs associated with protecting these global choke points. As underlying distributions of power change globally, the institutional arrangements that were once taken for granted have to be reassessed. An international order survives only if its institutions adapt to the evolving balance of global power, rather than clinging to outdated norms. The origins of the Barbary Wars teach us that international orders are dynamic systems, not self-sustaining moral constants. Stripping away modern political rhetoric reveals the underlying structural mechanics of state survival. For an enduring system to function, there must be an alignment between the costs of maintaining security and the responsibilities taken on by allied states. True critical thought in geopolitics demands we look past normative assumptions. History is a continuous, recalculating epic of power, leverage, and the harsh physical realities of securing the global commons. For decades, the public baseline was a relatively level playing field. Presidential announcements were delivered through press briefings and news cycles that, while not perfect, ensured the information reached the average citizen and the professional investor at roughly the same time. That baseline shifted in July 2026. During a crisis in the Strait of Hormuz, the White House announced a 20% cargo fee and a naval blockade. This was a direct intervention in a physical choke point, handling a massive portion of global oil trade. Bypassing traditional press channels, the announcement hit the commodities market instantly. There was no time for public debate, only immediate reactions from global financial institutions. The Truth API mechanism purposefully split the president's communications into two unequal streams. It sold high-speed, millisecond-level access to these posts directly to institutional hedge funds, allowing them to trade on world-altering news before the general public. This setup creates an information vacuum. When a platform for direct communication is re-engineered to sell speed, it prioritizes the monetization of an announcement over the message itself. By turning executive power into a commercial data feed, the presidency itself becomes a market-moving product. When the right to react to the law is sold to the highest bidder, the public's ability to trust that law begins to erode. This unequal information economy does more than just move money. It actively hijacks how we perceive political reality. Algorithmic trading desks now execute thousands of orders based on digital triggers before a human voter can even process the headline. The market has already decided the value of the news before we've even read it. Because the trading happens first, the public is forced to react to the secondary shocks, like a sudden spike in gas prices, rather than analyzing the actual strategic logic of the Hormuz blockade. Critics and legal experts argue this represents a commercialization of the presidency. They point to the anxiety of a system where the office of the POTUS literally manufactures the market moves it then sells access to. This has invited an unprecedented volume of private capital to flow through political media, all specifically designed to buy preferential access to the words of the executive branch. In this environment, the average citizen is relegated to the bottom tier of a closed information economy, receiving news only after its financial utility has been harvested by others. When financial algorithms dictate the immediate fallout of political speech, critical thought is suppressed. Voters find themselves reacting to a rigged market rather than a political debate. A moment of wonder. But there is a second half to this paradox. This same ecosystem, as commercialized as it is, has inadvertently become a floodlight for transparency. By broadcasting these conflicts of interest so openly, the API removes the shadows of traditional backroom deals. The monetization isn't hidden. It's happening in plain sight for anyone to track. This brazenness has triggered immediate journalistic reactions. Every time the market moves, the public is asking, who traded? Who profited? And were there any safeguards at all? This exposure forces us to define the actual boundaries of constitutional power. It makes us debate sovereign risk and public accountability because the data is too loud to ignore. The unfiltered nature of this commercialized media forces the public to confront the reality of modern power. It strips away illusions, leaving us to philosophize about the nature of our democracy in real time. Every political message now enters a digital environment that functions as a battlefield for perception. The era of being a passive consumer is shattered. When data moves at the speed of the Truth API, waiting for a traditional alert means reacting to a world that has already been traded upon. This requires an upgrade in how we think. We can no longer afford to only evaluate what a politician is saying. We must analyze the infrastructure of how a message is broadcast. We have to look at who is paying for early access and what they stand to gain from those milliseconds. Recognizing that media acts as both a filter and a floodlight changes how we evaluate international security and the rule of law. It forces us to look past the rhetoric and follow the incentives. Surviving this information economy means recognizing that the medium is the market. We can choose to be the critical auditors of this new architecture, or we can remain its capital. We often discuss human perspective as if it were a universal constant, a sterile academic theory where every rational person looks at the world and arrives at the same conclusions. Society relies on this assumption. We build our laws and institutions on the idea that critical thought is an objective, shared landscape. But that shared landscape fractures the moment the abstract becomes physical. Take the experience of a therapist in Israel, whose professional routine is abruptly interrupted by ballistic missile impacts in their community. When survival becomes an immediate priority, geography and personal experience recalibrate how global events are processed. The academic debate over international law doesn't vanish, but it is now filtered through a lens shaped by the visceral reality of conflict. We see this tension between shared ideals and subjective reality in how institutions record their own pasts. In Marine Corps historiography, there is a distinct separation between history and heritage. Heritage is a tool, a curated, emotionally resonant narrative designed to sustain belief and project a positive public image. History, by contrast, is the unvarnished record. It is the record of actions on the ground, often shaped by the specific, messy motivations of individual people. Apply this historical lens to the origins of the U.S. Navy. The unvarnished history shows the Navy was largely expanded to counter the Barbary states in the early 19th century, a pragmatic response to North African corsairs capturing American merchant ships and demanding heavy financial tribute for safe passage. Today, politicians reach back to those 19th century pirates, projecting that specific historical myth onto modern adversaries. In this context, the Barbary Wars serve less as an objective history and more as a way to legitimize modern, individualized policy frameworks by wrapping them in the authority of a shared past. The process of shaping a narrative to fit an individual agenda has accelerated, driven by a modern media ecosystem that fragmentizes collective discourse. We are watching the rise of monetized access. Critical geopolitical information is being stripped of its public utility and packaged as an exclusive transactional commodity. Consider the recent proposal for Trump Media to sell instant access to market-moving posts. This creates a two-tiered system. Those with capital receive the immediate signal, while the general public waits, allowing specific traders to profit from news first. This environment makes the speed of information dependent on a subscription price, effectively turning the observation of a crisis into a product you purchase. Once access to information is monetized, the traditional boundaries that separate political and intellectual authority begin to dissolve. We see this play out in the integration of crypto influencers into the highest levels of politics. Figures with no foreign policy training are securing direct access to decision-makers by commanding lucrative digital audiences. Digital reach and raw wealth are competing with institutional credentials. The power to frame our understanding of global events now frequently rests in the hands of internet celebrities. All of these layers, individual perspective, weaponized history, and transactional media access collide in the current military flashpoint at the Strait of Hormuz. Recent policy proposals for the region have floated a U.S. military blockade of the strait, coupled with the implementation of a 20% toll on all cargo passing through. The diplomatic establishment views these actions as a violation of international law, warning they threaten the security consensus that governed the region. But viewed through the lens of personal incentives and cost-sharing, this blockade operates as a blunt mechanism for recalibrating responsibility. It is a tactic designed to visibly reprice international security, forcing allied nations to pay directly for a service they previously underpaid for. We are watching the manifestation of a transactional global order, where military protection is directly tied to economic tolls rather than shared values. The global order persists through a constant adjustment to power and personal incentives. Navigating it requires looking past establishment rhetoric to analyze the underlying costs and rewards.
Meet Clara Narratio, curious audio for a noisy world. Start your day with the Daily World Brief. Make sense of markets with financial candy. And follow Brain Candy for strange ideas, history, culture, technology, and the questions that make learning stick. You'll also find classic audiobooks, plus book candy companions that bring great books into sharper focus. Follow Clara Narratio on Spotify, YouTube, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. Better yet, visit claranarratio.com. claranarratio.com. Curious audio, no fluff.